Now?
There you go. I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. I will go without my earphones then. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing? So you got this Meta interview coming up, huh?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I have this week, next week are my final interviews. They are divided between next Monday and Wednesday.
Okay.
This week I took a week off at work to, have the final week of preps. So,
Yeah,
we'll see how it goes. So I'm just trying to aim with my pick for early next week, and we'll see.
Is product architecture the one that you're most nervous about?
Um, I actually don't know. I have this is the first time I'm applying for a staff role, but both previous times were completely different. And I actually had been for 3 years.
Oh, okay,
But
cool.
yeah, but when I quit, I was and I
Yeah.
wasn't interviewing for a six. So I kind of I'm not sure what to expect. I'm pretty sure that with the behavioral I should be good. I've done these like several times, but obviously I have never interviewed for any six. And this, I guess, especially the architecture part is kind of this like infamously kind of vague. Like it's described by a lot of people about as this like super difficult thing. Like you need to show who knows what, to show that you're good enough. And I'm just, I guess it's the most vague one, right? So yeah, you might say that probably I'm the most nervous about this one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think what I gathered is that what we'll pay the most attention to today is that delta between senior and staff, and see if I can have any tips for you on making sure that you fall on the right side of that spectrum. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we pay attention to, or that you want to get out of this session so I can tailor it accordingly?
Well, just all in all, I'm curious, like, about any feedback you might have if that was like a real interview. So communication, obviously, structure, yeah. Of course, like one more thing that I guess it's not super clear to me is like the difference between product architecture design and the system design, as I'm sure you have heard hundreds of times, right?
Yeah.
So as far as I'm aware, it's really kind of another kind of point of chance in a way. It really depends on the interviewer, how skilled they are, how much experience they have with the product interviews. If they have a bit less experience, I've heard that maybe they will fall back more to just system design, or just like to what they know, obviously, right? So from that perspective, I guess yeah, it says a little bit tricky for me, because I have led, obviously, and I used to be also a full stack engineer, right? I mean, not right, you don't know that, but I used to be a full stack engineer as well. But I was never a lead architect for like a system at Facebook scale, where I would be responsible for, choosing the technology,
Yeah.
and designing the architecture. So, I tried to learn as much as I could, but in these areas, probably, I mean, you can tell me afterwards, but I think that it may or may not be clear that some of this knowledge about particular systems is more from, theory than practice, basically. So, we'll
For
see.
what it's worth, almost nobody has experience architecting systems at Facebook scale. As you know from being on the inside, you work on a small little portion of something. So don't worry too much about that. What I will say, just really, really quickly before we get started, and maybe we can tie in some examples at the end after your session. But you're right, the delta is minor. In the majority of cases, especially at the staff level, you're basically getting a system design interview. The only thing that you can guarantee is that it's a user-facing application. So there's no designer rate limiter, there's no designer message queue, there's no top K, there's none of that stuff. It's Uber, Yelp, YouTube, Ticketmaster, all of that stuff. And then beyond that, yeah, there's some opportunities for you to show product thinking. There's some opportunities to maybe go a little bit deeper on API. But when I say a little deeper, I mean like 30 seconds, a minute more. It's not the whole interview. So we'll see how you do today, and we'll use that to anchor the feedback accordingly.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Cool. Let's do it. So I'm going to open up an integrated Excalidraw whiteboard here. Of course, Excalidraw is what you'll use in the meta interview. The question that I have for you today is I want you to, and it's a question that's popular in the meta product architecture interviews right now, that's to design a system like Yelp. Before I tell you specifically what I care about, is Yelp a product that you have used as a user?
Well, not for several years, to be honest. Since Apple bought them, I don't think I have used them once. I had a period. The vast majority of my career I spent as an iOS engineer. So I had a period where I was really curious in how they operated. They were like one of the cool startups. Obviously, they really had like a very good mobile app. But it must have been like 5, 6, 7 years ago the last time I used them more than like once a week.
Well, that's more than good enough because, of course, we'll be doing a simple version of Yelp. And the features that are core to Yelp, which are the features that I care about here, are the ability to find businesses. I'll let you define what it means to find a business along with criteria, but you need to be able to find a business, of course. And then second is rate and review businesses. And so those are the core functionalities of a system like Yelp. I'll let you take it from there. And I'm going to start our timer in the top right. You'll have 35 minutes.
35.
Yep, and that's consistent. That's consistent with Meta. 5 on either side for questions and pleasantries.
Sounds great. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna follow the structure of starting with functional requirements. So we will talk a little bit about how the users are going to use the app or the system. We're gonna talk a little bit about non-functional requirements as well. To have some broader context for how we are going to evaluate the architecture. We're going to talk a little bit about the data structures or like the types of data we will be working on, about the APIs, and then we're going to move on to the system design. So starting with functional requirements. You already mentioned something, but just to make sure I understand. So basically, users will be able to find businesses. I'm really curious to learn what the search criteria are going to be. Like, what kind of UX are we aiming for? Is there like some search box that I start with and I enter some terms that may include anything from names to descriptions to locations, and then I get a list sorted by something? Or do I have maybe some kind of filters that I apply? Do you have any preferences from that perspective?
Yeah, so in general, questions like that, the product questions, I'll put it on you. You tell me what you think is best, and if I think that it's unreasonable or unconstrained, then I'll come in and make adjustments.
Okay, cool. So I think let's go with just search terms for now. Maybe we'll think about it a little bit more later. Search terms just because it seems simpler for users to just have a single box and enter what they're looking for than, going for some more robust UI like on Amazon.com. So that's the first one. The second one, users will be able to rate businesses as well. That's also something you mentioned. So I imagine something like 1 to 5 stars rating. Is this more or less how it works?
Yeah, so let's go a mandatory 1 to 5 star rating and then an optional text review.
Optional text review. Okay. Do we have any other requirements? It sounds like those are the two main things that you mentioned, Ivan.
So those are the two main things. I'll say, as we picture this kind of simplistic, maybe Yelp's complete flow, when you search for a business, you're going to get, as you said, the list of businesses maybe sorted by something. Yeah. And then you can probably click on one of those. Yeah. And to click on one of those, you'll see the business page. And this will have the business details as well as all of the ratings and reviews and all of that.
Yeah. So users will be able to see details pages for chosen businesses. Okay, thank you for that.
And then actually, one more thing just quickly. As it pertains to search, I agree with your decision on a term. There's one component that's important that's missing here, and that's going to be some location. So I don't care about pizzerias in New York too much while I'm here in LA. So we'll need to account for that.
So I was kind of assuming that a term could also be like included name of a location, but I assume that you're talking basically about latitude and longitude. Like somehow they can mention that it's like within 5 kilometers from me or something like that, right?
Yeah, like the typical use flow of the product that we'll be designing in Yelp will be something like, where's the closest laundromat to me? Or I'm going to be in San Francisco this weekend. What are the good Mexican restaurants?
Right.
And so in both cases, I'm bounded by some location.
Right. Sounds good. Okay, cool. So we will not be talking about signups, logins, anything like that. We are assuming that there will be some sessions, basically. We don't have to worry about it for now. So we can move on to non-functional requirements then. And okay, so thinking about data consistency, I would be guessing that we will be choosing availability over strong consistency. So it's like, it's not super important that my review appears for everybody just instantly. So for ratings and reviews and actually businesses as well, I assume, right? So if somebody adds a business to the system, I also probably don't have to see it immediately. Then, like, what scale do you think we're talking about? I cannot remember it, but Yelp, I remember like probably like tens of millions at least of monthly active users.
So we'll say 100 million monthly active, and then there's 10 million businesses on the platform.
So 10 million businesses, and I assume also, like, not quite sure yet if it's going to be super relevant, but this is going to be like quite read heavy, I imagine. Like most people don't really review the stuff that they see on such platforms. They basically search and then they check it out, right? So what would you say would be the like write to read ratio, like 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000?
Yeah, I think your observation is correct, and it's probably on that 1 to 10,000, 1 to 1,000 range. Most people search and read. Almost nobody writes reviews.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I'm thinking. Okay, and the search needs to be fast. I guess that's kind of the main product requirement I would expect for this. Okay. Does this sound good as a kind of starting list of non-functional requirements? Do you feel like something like is glaringly missing here?
Yeah, this is great. I'm going to add one more to you if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And that's that in general, with the user-created content, particularly in the way of reviews, we'll care somewhat about the integrity of those reviews. There's a lot of things we could consider, spam, all of this. I don't care. What I do care is just upholding the constraint that any given user can only review any given business once.
Okay.
So I can't go give my competitor a bunch of 0 stars every day.
Yeah. Great. That was kind of, yeah, I thought that was kind of obvious, but yeah, that definitely should have pointed it out. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk about the entities we're gonna work with. So definitely there's going to be a business. There's definitely going to be a review, or rather rating, because like, yeah, I imagine that there will be some score and an optional text field probably in this rating model, like you mentioned. There's going to be some profile. There's going to be a location, like you mentioned. And yeah, I think that sounds about reasonable for now, based on the functional requirements that we have outlined. Do you see something missing here? Okay. Cool. So let's talk about the APIs. Okay, so users will be able to find businesses. So yeah, we're gonna assume it's going to be a REST API. And there's nothing here that makes me think that it should be something else. So let's say that for searching businesses, we're gonna have a search endpoint, but preferably without the typo, that will accept our search term, like we mentioned, and let's say location as well. This is going to be pretty vague, like you mentioned, like maybe location. Like let's say for now that these are coordinates or longitude and latitude. Like maybe we change it a bit later, and then it's going to return an array of businesses, like partial probably, like an array of names, basically, like whatever we want to display on the list. Definitely should also support pagination. So probably we're gonna have some optional cursor parameter and maybe also page size. We can talk about it a little bit later when we design the system. One more thing that I should also mention is that we're going to handle authentication in headers, either via session ID or a JWT token, depending on how the login system works for the product. So I'm not going to be mentioning authentication for each consecutive here. So we have the search endpoint. Then we're going to have another endpoint for rating businesses. I think it should probably just return a status. Don't see right now any need to return anything more complex, any more data. And in the body, we will submit some business ID. We're gonna submit a rating, and then optionally we're gonna submit the review text as well. And also maybe above the review, we're gonna have an endpoint that will basically fetch the details, like the business details endpoint. And that seems like about right for the functional requirements so far. Again, just to touch base with you, do you see like something missing here or something not clear up to this point?
Looks good to me.
Okay, sounds great. So let's go.
Actually, just a quick question for you. You mentioned authentication. Great, fine. Are all of these endpoints going to require authentication?
That's a great question. I think I'm not, again, I cannot remember like how Yelp works exactly. That's something I should have definitely asked in the beginning. It's a product question. Like, do we want to allow people who are not authenticated to view search results and post reviews? I kind of assume that for posting reviews, we would require authentication just because of the requirement to not allow a single person to post 2 ratings for a single business. I cannot see any reason not to let unauthenticated users to search, other than, I cannot really see any reason. So probably, and also just the fact that you're asking make me think that probably for the search we don't need authentication. Right. So is this okay? Can we assume that for search, no authentication, for the other 2 we will need authentication? Great. Okay. Thank you for asking. And now I would like to. Okay. So cool. So I'm gonna start by following what you recommend in your videos. So like, let's see how it works for me. Sure. I'm gonna try to start with a simpler design that will focus on filling the functional requirements, and then we can kind of see what doesn't scale, what doesn't meet the non-functional requirements, and we can go a little bit deeper. So we will start with a client. I guess one more question that I should have asked, or I want to ask, is like, do we have web clients, mobile clients, or both? I don't necessarily see any major like impact on the design right now, but
yeah. Don't care. Doesn't matter. You can abstract it away either way. Client box is fine.
So yeah, let's just go with the client. Okay, so let's see what kind of architecture we would like to go with for this. We have a read-heavy system, which makes me think that probably the search we would like to probably go with like microservice architecture to kind of divide the search service from the rating service so that they can be scaled independently. So I'm gonna put in an API gateway / load balancer here from the beginning. Maybe not go into too much detail about it just right now, how it would work. But let's say we will start with search. So let's say like one more thing that we'll need to decide is basically, yeah, okay, cool. So sorry for thinking a lot. So let's start with the search service. For now, I'm just going to assume that it just goes straight to some, let's call it like business DB. So to start drawing the arrows, basically, we'll have the search call here, then it's going to be routed to our service, and then the service is going to basically fetch businesses according to the search term and location. So we will here basically assume that each business has an ID, name, some description, probably also like some tags, some stuff to make it easier to find and to index first of all. Definitely location as well. Let's say still that it's latitude and longitude. Let's think about it a little bit deeper later, what we might want to do here. So yeah, for now, let's just assume that this is like a simple database, whether SQL or non-SQL, and this search endpoint just goes directly here and does a full table scan, or like, you know, if it's a non-SQL, basically like a full document scan. So this will not scale, and we will come back to this later. Let's see how we can improve it later. So that's for the search. For the business details, we're gonna have a separate service here. We'll call it business CRUD service. I'm kind of thinking at this time whether this should be actually the same service as search, but I kind of feel that we will want to scale search independently further, probably add some Elasticsearch or something like that. So at that point, probably it will make sense to have different code bases. So I'm kind of like on the edge of the simpler and more maybe complex design right now, but you know, let's see how it goes. So here we have the business details call that again is routed here. And for now, let's assume that this shoots to the same database basically and get the business object for a given ID. So that's the business details. And then the ratings, basically, with our last endpoint that we need to place somewhere. So this is our third call post. Cannot remember already. Okay, business rate. So, and now I'm thinking also if this should use the same service or another one. We thinking if it makes sense to, yeah, for now, probably I will just use the same service for this. And then we can talk a little bit about the trade-offs. Maybe we will split a separate rating service for that. So that would be one thing that it does at this point. And the other thing would create some rating objects. So a rating object would have a user ID. So this is the ID of the user who is creating the rating. Then we have the rating itself, which is like a 1 to 5 score, basically. And what else? The optional review, let's say, optional text of like some size, and that's probably it. Let's keep it simple for now. Yeah, and then
probably one key field you're missing on that one.
Okay.
Just oversight.
Yes, the business probably would be great to add this.
That'd be useful.
Thank you, Ivan. Okay, great. So it's a many-to-many relationship. Yeah, we can say already at this point probably that we will need to index this on business ID. Probably also I would add date time here. So business ID and date time, so that we can easily find businesses for a given review and maybe sort them by time. Oh, and also rating. So yeah, that would be a bit more complex index here. So yeah, get indexes for a given business, sort them by rating and by time. Yeah, so that's with this current design, this is what this service would be doing, basically. Create the rating objects. Okay, so that's kind of like the super simplistic version. We have several problems here. One of them we already mentioned, which is like the search that is definitely not scaling. We said that we would have, I'm looking, 20 million monthly active users. So probably like, the usual kind of ratio that is used, I think probably would say like 20 million daily users. Not sure how many searches a day. Do you have any like idea how many searches a given one user can? Probably not that many, probably between like 5 and 10, I would guess. So that would be 20 million times 10 like daily searches, which I should compute right now, but yeah, what definitely would enough to be able to scale horizontally. We'll need to scale this horizontally. Maybe we'll need to add some caching. So yeah, definitely the search is not going to be effective with the current design. Yeah, we also haven't said anything about this requirement for now. So actually we can start by this. With this, so a user can rate the business only once. So that should be validation that happens here, basically, for this like handler of the post endpoint. We said that we will value availability higher than consistency. So I guess there is some kind of like non-zero chance that I will be logged in maybe in 2 devices, and I would like super quickly, post a review from one account from 2 devices that will be connected to and there will be some race condition maybe, but I don't think in real life I would worry about that. If I'm completely honest with you, I would probably focus just on the validation here. So basically we would check whether when I try to post a review, the service would check whether I had already posted a review, and if so, it would return like an error. So that should be fine. So I think we can focus just on the search for now and then see how it goes. Then we can also talk a little bit more about how this service scales for this like heavy read that we will have. But let's start with the search. We have still 10 minutes. Okay, so for this, I think that we should just use like one of the search engines with Elasticsearch, I think, being the most popular one. So we should basically add an Elasticsearch cluster. And then the question is basically how it will be populated, like the first question. So we could probably set up something here that we generally call I always forget.
CDC.
Yeah, but CDC. But generally, we'll put Kafka here, which I think it's called Kafka Connect. That's something that maybe for this. Not actually, I haven't used Kafka Connect. Maybe that would be like too complicated. Maybe we could use like, depending on the database that we have here, like either one of the drivers. Like some databases provide basically a stream, an API to subscribe to a stream themselves. Some others maybe don't, and then we would need to set up Kafka. So yeah, maybe we can just call it CDC and not go like super deep into this. So yeah, basically the key thing here is that, I mean, that's actually not that important. Yeah, I wanted to say that maybe we should think about, batching these requests here so that we don't have too many writes, too many quick writes, consecutive writes to Elasticsearch, because yeah, it actually has like a cap on searches because it needs to rebuild indexes on every write. But it doesn't seem like we'd have that many writes in this system actually. So maybe let's not think about it for now. But in any case, yeah, we will have an Elasticsearch here with reverse index on the term that will be sent in the request. So basically, we will tell like which fields from the business we want to include in the full text search, basically. So like name, description, tags for sure. And then, as far as I remember, Elasticsearch also supports geohashing. So we should be able to query both by the term and by location, which we still haven't clarified exactly how we will do it. I mean, what we mean by location. But yeah, we can maybe actually talk about it for a couple of minutes now. So
So this is actually interesting. Let me be kind of clear in what I want here.
Yeah.
So there's two options, and this is consistent with Yelp. If you go to Yelp, it defaults to your current location. And if you hit search and you go look at the query param, it's exactly what you'd expect. There's a lat longe in the query param, and it looks up by lat longe. Now, the other thing that Yelp supports is that, for example, I'm actually traveling to San Francisco tomorrow, and I want to get dinner specifically in the Mission District. Mission District isn't a city. It's not a zip code. It's just an area, right? And I can type in Mission District, and it auto-completes for me. You don't need to worry about autocomplete. But if I do, then my query param is now the string Mission District.
Yeah.
And so I want you to handle both of those. Where the query param is lat longe, I think that one should be relatively straightforward. I think you've even satisfied it here. And then where the query param instead is a string.
Yeah. Okay. So the lat and longe is like the simple one, I guess, or the simpler one. Like, so probably we don't need to go too deep into this. So yeah, but in any case, like, so like the location in terms of lat and longe, I think could just be indexed by Elasticsearch. You're using geohashing, and then if it's a given parameter, it will just do its thing and it will return what it needs to return. Typing in mission is a much more interesting case. So I actually, I'm gonna be trying to come up with something. I have never implemented anything like this. So like I would be thinking here either about some system that on business creation or update basically takes the location and tries to assign some names of areas it is in, like, hey, like I'm creating a restaurant, I'm entering the location, we can use some like Google Maps API or whatever to basically take the name of the city, the name of the district, the name of the neighborhood, or like whatever, and put it in here at the time of creation of the update. That sounds like a reasonably simple solution to me, I guess. It makes the creation and update a little bit slower, but we don't have that many rights, at least that we haven't been really talking so far about how often the business would be updated, but I'm kind of assuming it wouldn't be very often. I assume that it's kind of like, okay, I create my business and the location is not something that will be changing very often, actually. So that sounds like a reasonable solution. Alternatively, if we are super worried about not slowing this down, this CRUD service, when we are updating location, we could have some kind of worker scheduled by some cron job, maybe that periodically goes through here and fills in some like location info basically, right? But yeah, I think that probably on updates it would be kind of enough. Either just fill in this data on updates synchronously or asynchronously in some way, basically.
And then you sort of mentioned this, but clarify, what is the location info exactly?
So if I enter the coordinates, what I said, I'm curious if that makes sense. I enter the coordinates or mark it on on the map, the system sends the coordinates, and then we use some kind of API to figure out like the name of the city, the name of the district, the name of the country. So this is text info basically that we put here. And then this is also indexed in Elasticsearch, basically in the same reverse index as everything else. So in your example, like I cannot remember, what's the name of that great La Taqueria. You enter La Taqueria in Mission, basically. Okay. You enter the coordinates. The system uses Google Maps to get basically the information about, hey, it's in Mission, it's in San Francisco, it's on, and the name of the street I cannot remember, Mission Street, I guess it must be. So it will put here like Mission Street, San Francisco, Mission, as kind of like a list of strings, basically, or just one string.
And then Elasticsearch is, instead of indexing on lat long, now there's no geohash or anything, if I'm understanding you correctly. All searches are just based on those strings.
No, I was thinking actually about both, indexing both, so that, although that's a great question, let's think about it a little bit. So I was thinking, yeah, if we remove the geohashing completely, then like we will. Yeah, you mentioned in the beginning, like that we want to do if we remove geohashing, we will not be able to do things like, search in the radius of like 5 kilometers or something like that, right? So definitely we don't want to do that. I guess what we could do is like, if you search for, a cool restaurant within, like, let's say you type that you want it to be within 5 kilometers from Mission District, like whatever that would mean, basically. We could assume that, like we would also just choose like the middle of the Mission District, basically. And then just use geohashing to search around that, right? So instead of actually putting the data here, what we could do is try to somehow, depending again on like what the UI looks like, right? To try to parse the name of the district somehow from the search term, and then basically choose some arbitrary point in the middle of like the mission in this example, and then search in the radius. and we could do it at search time, for example. Yeah,
So
or maybe
I think these are all reasonable considerations. And for the sake of time, because I see we only got a minute left, maybe we can go 1 minute over if we need to. But talk to me about how you're going to handle that item potency of reviews, the one user, one business thing.
Yeah. Right. So I think what we said so far was that basically, yeah, if I try to send a review for the first time, the system will check whether a review already exists or not. And if it doesn't exist, it would create the review. And if it does exist, it would return an error.
And so that makes sense.
Yeah.
You have code in the business card service here. Let me introduce kind of some additional considerations. Your system's grown significantly, and some new team now also through some different path for some reason writes reviews. Or you acquired a company and now you have some data engineering team and they're backfilling reviews. And obviously that constraint has no longer been met. They didn't copy your one line of code. They didn't see it. These guys don't even know code exists.
Yeah, right. So depending on the database we would use, like basically, we can just create like a uniqueness requirement. I'm pretty sure that most SQL databases as well as Postgres databases support that. So that would be like the simplest solution, I guess. Again, that would mean that the system would also need to support transactions. So that kind of starts limiting our choices of databases a little bit, I think. But something like basically Postgres, like MySQL. I think Dynamo also has some stronger consistency guarantees. So yeah, in that case, basically, if we want to give the possibility for several services to write directly to the database, we would need to rely basically on database validation and just have like uniqueness constraints on the business ID and user ID in the rating table.
Makes sense. Awesome. Okay. Break. Congratulations. You got through the interview. Let me hear from you first. How are you feeling? How do you think it went?
Not great, to be honest. I mean, I'm very happy I've done it. I feel like, not surprisingly, I feel like I should have been much more efficient with like what I was saying. I didn't feel like I had a lot of time to think. I felt like I focused basically only on like very rudimentary stuff. Also, you needed to ask me several questions to kind of help me, starting from the requirement to see details page for a business, with a few other things as well. Like at least 2 or 3 times you needed to help me. Overall, I think the system should work, but I don't think also it's like all of these things that I said, like basically like very rudimentary stuff. We didn't really go deep in any particular area. I think maybe I said a little bit about Elasticsearch, a little bit about the DB, but yeah, that wasn't much. This time passed like very, very quickly.
It goes quick. Well, let me tell you what I think. I think that you're a bit harder on yourself, though in general, true. I think you got the essence of kind of the things that we'll want to talk about adjusting. But as I said, more harshly than maybe I would say, and I will say here. So here's my high level, and then we'll go linearly through your interview and we'll talk about exactly where things could be changed and can be improved. But the high level is you have a lot to be proud of. You should feel encouraged. I feel encouraged, and if I was a betting man for your interview next week, I would be betting on you doing well based on what I just saw here. Had I just done this in an interview at Meta, I'm doing higher at staff, low confidence, higher at senior, high confidence.
Yeah.
And that delta in low confidence is largely on the back of the things that you said, which is that I want to see more depth and I want to see more conviction. Those are the two largest things that were missing for me. And the efficiency, or the moving slowly, is what prevented us from being able to have some of that depth. And actually, the places where I pointed things out for you to add, they were minor. They're not huge, particularly in the setup. Like, I do that for most candidates, including staff candidates. It's not a big deal. Would I love for you to proactively identify the needs of Vue businesses? Sure, but it's not the end of the world. But then when it gets into the actual design, Yelp itself, not to be dismissive of it, that's not at all what I'm trying to say, but it's a relatively straightforward system. And the beauty of it, and especially with the staff candidate, comes in, how deep can we go? And how much can we recognize its simplicity and articulate that simplicity? And so there were a handful of places where you did that really well, and we'll call out what those were. And there were other places maybe for where there was opportunities to emphasize it even further. So that's the 10,000 foot view. Does that feedback resonate? It's largely in line with yours, and then we'll go into detail.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Yeah, curious about the details.
So let's do it. So let's go through functional requirements. You talked about it. I think that the main thing I want you to consider here is two things. You're not designing Yelp. You're not trying to clone Yelp. Mm-hmm. And two, you're the product guy. This is maybe the distinction in a product architecture interview versus a system design interview. So you make the decisions. You tell me what's needed, right? There was kind of throughout the interview moments where you were looking for me to make a product decision, and I'll jump in and I'll guide where I need to. I love that you gave me spaces in interview or in between sections to suggest things, but in those moments where it's a product decision, you make it and you show that conviction. You tell me what we need to search by. Like, you're designing the product, and you don't need to say, I'm trying to think about what Yelp does. I don't necessarily care about what Yelp does. You have a goal. Develop a platform that allows people to find businesses and rate and review them, right? You can take inspiration where you need be, as you always would, but you're the product guy. So keep that in mind. Non-functional requirements. This was great. Frankly, I wouldn't change a thing. You got the most important things. Your articulation of why consistency was less important was great. Read-to-write ratio, super important here. Low latency search. These are all the important ones. The integrity of reviews, most candidates miss it. It's a bit obscure. I usually suggest it, so you're not abnormal in that way. Of course, if you did think about something like that, it's only a bonus. That's kind of some product thinking maybe, but no big deal. APIs, again, I really like them. A couple just minor suggestions, and these are only fluff on top. This was passing for staff for me from an API perspective. But when we do APIs in a product architecture interview, there's some opportunities for you to just add a bit of embellishment. And so some places where you can do this are, let me call out the ones that you did. What endpoints need pagination? Great, you did that, perfect. Consideration for payload size. So on the search endpoint, do we need to return the full business or just partial? You did this, perfect. These were fantastic. Other things to consider is like whether we need any prefetching anywhere. Probably not relevant here, not largely relevant anyway. The other one is, do we need to split endpoints up for either minimizing payload size or, in this case, for the pagination of reviews? So kind of the only quote unquote error you have here is that Vue business details endpoint's also going to need to return the reviews. Mm-hmm. And so if you did append this, and many candidates will just do this, this is reasonable, or list of reviews. This is reasonable. But now you have the case that query to get the reviews is obviously the larger query and the larger payload. And so it would make more sense to break these into two for two reasons. One, then you're going to get business details on the page immediately. You'll have some skeleton to load reviews. And then two, you can paginate through those reviews. Yeah. And so like that's kind of some additional flavor that certainly could be mentioned here. You talked about the authentication stuff after me asking. That's kind of a good thing to just consider up front. Which endpoints need to be authenticated? Again, a place where you make the product decision. I want people to be able to use my product. I want them to be able to come in and get immediately kind of part of the ecosystem. So searching and even viewing businesses, no authentication. But because of my concerns on the integrity of reviews, those they're going to need people to be authenticated for. Maybe even within the product, I try to upsell them to do reviews, which will then require the authentication. And of course, then I'll have their email and everything. But that's some of the additional stuff you'll talk about in APIs. In general, I thought you did quite well. Let me pause just for a quick moment. Questions, thoughts so far? Otherwise, I'll keep running through.
No, that's really great. Thank you. Yeah, great call out about the endpoint to fetch reviews. Yeah, all great. Thanks.
Perfect. So as you got into the design, high-level design was great and correct. A couple just minor things that I'll say here is that it was like perfect for a senior interview. And I think that you might have been taking some lessons from my videos for better or worse. in that in the staff interview, a place where you can be more efficient is that like I'm taking for granted a lot of your knowledge. And I'm assuming you and I are on the same page through a lot of things. And so as it pertains to even like labeling some of the arrows here and being explicit about like the simple search path and some of this labeling, it's honestly great. Like I love it from a communication perspective. And if you were a senior engineer, I particularly love it. It's probably a waste of time for a staff engineer. So I'm not saying that this is showing up as negatives in your feedback. Of course not. But it is something that's taking unnecessary time. Yeah. And so had you just said, client, gateway, I have a search service, I have a business DB. Of course, this is going to be slow. The path here is from client to business DB, and we're going to return it. Takes 15 seconds, and I'm on the same page as you. You're a staff engineer. I know that we know what we're doing here, right? In fact, I like this idea, and of course, I promote this of like building up from a high-level design, and I think that's necessary, particularly if you haven't seen the problem before. But don't feel like you don't have to. If you know the solution and it's easy and it's simple, by all means, feel free. Like if you got to this point and you were like, this isn't going to work for search, so I'm just going to plop Elasticsearch down here. Maybe we'll come back and talk about more details, exactly what indexes we're building, inconsistency, and all the interesting things about it, caching, whatever. But like, I know that just searching on the business DB is not going to work, so I can go right to Elasticsearch. Yeah. What you did, again, not a negative, but from a time perspective and an efficiency perspective, you can kind of take more liberties there, knowing that we both know. So that's something that can happen there, and I think will speed you up. And then that's going to afford you the opportunities to do some of this depth. And the depth comes in a couple directions. The first is actually by way of simplicity. And let me try to articulate this kind of clearly to make sure this isn't confusing. But there's this graph, and I think you actually did pretty well here. This graph looks something like this. And on the x-axis is the seniority of the candidate. On the y-axis is the complexity of their solution. So complexity, seniority. And what you find, spelling, who cares? What you find is that junior and mid-level candidates, their solutions are super simple because they don't know any better. Mm-hmm. Senior candidates over-engineer the hell out of everything. They put message queues in every place. They add caching where they don't need caching, all this stuff. And then staff principal candidates end up over here, where their solution is simple. More simple than a senior candidate, oftentimes even resembling that of a junior candidate. But the distinction is that they can carefully articulate why that simplicity is better. Mm-hmm. And so some places where you were doing that and where I'd love to see even the further conviction is like the determination as to whether or not we need different services here. And so actually, there's no right or wrong answer here, but I probably would have taken a slightly different justification. And that I would have said search and view are going to be the same because they're going to be on the same order of scale. Mm-hmm. And then writing reviews, which happens far less frequently, that'll be its own service so that we can scale search and views independently. We'll keep reviews separate. But I agree with your kind of determination that there needs to be some consolidation. A lot of candidates will have 3 services here, and it's like, why? Viewing an event is one line of code to query a database. Yeah. You know, put that in search. It's the same scale. It's all great. And you can clearly articulate to me why, and it shows the experience of like, I've had to maintain these systems. And maintaining multiple services sucks. There's more places for things to go wrong. So every place I can consolidate, I'm going to do that. And even if you can articulate that to the interviewer, that shows that level of seniority. And then same too with the database. You made the right decision here, whether or not you actually didn't weigh it as a decision, you just did it. But businesses and ratings being in the same database, a lot of candidates will try to split these up. I agree with your decision. One, you can take advantage of some of the relational nature here. You couldn't do that if they were in separate databases. But 2, this is an opportunity where maybe you could have done a little bit of math. And I think there were some opportunities for this throughout the interview. But you could have said something as simple as this. We have 10 million businesses. Each business only has like a kilobyte of data. It's nothing. And that right there is like 0.01 terabytes, 10 gigabytes or something like this, 0.001. And then from there, maybe we multiply that by 10 because we need to have some ratings and reviews in there. It's 0.1 terabytes of data. It's nothing. It's on a single instance. And that's kind of my key identification to my interviewer is we're not working with a lot of data here. Not only does the data never change, but it's super small. And as a result, a single database, maybe I just put a cache in front of it or a single read replica. Of course, I'll have some snapshotting. I don't know. It's a product architecture interview. You don't have to go to too much detail there. But that's the key observation. And then I loved the conversation that you had here about CDC. Obviously, maybe there was like a little bit of trip up on terminology. I don't care too much. But I loved this conversation. I wanted the conviction. And so this is the clear articulation of like, exactly as you said, Elasticsearch has to reindex on every write. And so we want to minimize the number of writes. And so let me do a little bit of math here. Like, how many writes are we going to have? Or it doesn't even need to be a math in this case. It's just kind of a prediction. If I have 10 million businesses, people don't update their businesses much. Maybe like 1% of those update their businesses. That's 1,000, over 100,000. This is like one every couple of minutes. It's nothing. So I don't need to do any batching here. But if I did and there were more writes, then we would consider batching. Perfect. Fantastic. That conversation was amazing, and I appreciated that. Some other places that are interesting here and opportunities for you to think about product thinking is that what I usually encourage candidates to do is to sort of visualize the UX a little bit. Mm-hmm. Not because this is strictly necessary to draw it or anything like that, but because it makes you think of what I may be missing. And so particularly if you visualize this UX, you would think people come in and they do their whole search box thing. This might have got you to think about what are the different things I search by, either lat longe or by location. How do I want to do this? Regardless. Then the search results come up. You identified that it's a partial search result. One thing that you might identify as important here to users is like an average rating. Mm-hmm. And so not only on the view details page, but on the search results, I want an average rating. And so this would have been another follow-up question for me if we had more time. That average rating is going to be difficult to compute on the fly. It's going to be expensive. You don't want to do that. So I'd ask you how you'd handle that. And so candidates, oftentimes, this is actually a pretty illuminating question that I answer, and great for staff, in my opinion, because the answers are simple. But what I see is that a senior candidate does the following. They say, okay, I'm going to put a message queue there, and then I'm going to have some asynchronous worker that updates the average review based on these updates as they're coming in. Okay, fine, sure, that's kind of true. You might also propose I'm going to have a cron job that's going to update it just daily or something. Also interesting. A staff candidate will say, reviews come in if I have 100,000 daily active users, even higher order of magnitude than you had, and we decided it was 10,000 to 1, then at 100,000 seconds, that's one review a second. It's nothing. And what does it take to update an average review? Well, I could have an average here and a total, the total count of reviews. And then it's just total times average plus new one divided by total plus 1. It's like 10 CPU cycles. It's nothing. Can happen synchronously. There's no issues here. That's not going to take a lot of time. You're not going to be holding any lock or connection open for longer than it needs to be. So that's easy. And then you can have that product discussion of like, do I want it to change on the fly? Do I want you to add a rating and a review automatically change? Is that disorienting? Do I want to just do a cron job then so that doesn't happen? Here are my trade-offs. This is what you would discuss with your PM in a meeting, and I want you to make a decision with some conviction. Yeah. So it kind of gives you some indication. Let me pause again. These conversations, kind of seeing how you could arrive at some of these, the importance of the simplicity, these trade-offs that we're discussing.
Yeah, that's really great. So like that's the first time I'm really seeing like where the differences between staff and senior are. So like, yeah, really appreciate it. And yeah, all great examples, obviously. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. The last thing I'll say here then is just this discussion, which is the kind of a really interesting one about how to handle both geolocation and term. These are going to be two different search paths to Elasticsearch, two different queries, excuse me. One is going to be your classic lat longe plus a radius, kind of common to Elasticsearch, great. And then the other one's more interesting because you have two options. Option A is, I think, the direction of what you were suggesting, which is that anytime you add a business, we do some computation of like the fan out of their locations. And so maybe for a business in the Mission District, then we have a street name and then Mission District, and then where is Mission District in San Francisco? I don't know, but maybe like, Northwest San Francisco, and then San Francisco, and then Bay Area, and then California. You have all those terms. Yeah. And if that's the case, that's great. That's kind of a list of terms. And then within Elasticsearch, we'd index just on those terms as if they're tags. Yeah. Easy. And I think this is what you're suggesting. That's great. Yeah. The alternate one is that we have geo points, which are supported in Elasticsearch as well. And this is just useful for you to know in general. And so you can have like for any of these businesses, the list of its geo points, which creates the polygon that it exists in. Okay. And these can be passed as input to Elasticsearch. And you can say, find things within these geo points. So if somebody searched for Mission District, then maybe you have a location here, which is Mission, and it has its geopoints, its list of geopoints. And then so too for each layer. San Francisco has its own list of geopoints and whatever. So to be honest with you, I kind of like the simplicity of the direction that you were going. I think this is probably closer to what Yelp does. We can weigh the trade-offs on either one respectively, but kind of good and interesting to know.
Awesome.
Okay. We're at about time. Happy to go a couple minutes over here to answer any questions that you may have, but anything else I can help with? Hopefully the feedback resonates and
yeah, that was like really great. Yeah, like really easy to understand for me, you know, all based in like really clear examples. Yeah, and yeah, gives me a lot to think about. Thank you so much. Made my notes. I'm actually gonna have another.
I think you have another with me later this week.
Also
right?
with you, right? On Friday. Okay, yeah. I haven't checked if that was also you, but yeah, on Friday.
Yeah, it's with me. Which I'll tell you what is unusual that you get two with me. So you maybe lucked out, maybe didn't, but
yeah. Well, definitely, I feel lucky. I'm not sure. I mean, you know, I'm not sure if, I mean, yeah, I mean, no, I am actually sure. I thought for a second that, you know, maybe you would have some bias coming in or like whatever, right? But you've done so much of this that, yeah, I don't think this is going to be a problem. So yeah, maybe it's actually going to help us a little bit that you have a little bit more context about me. Maybe you'll be able to share some, you know, more nuanced feedback. So that's really great. But in any case, yeah, I have a lot to think about, and that was super useful to me. And I definitely feel like I made this kind of like noob mistake. I should have just timed, you know, my exercises before, you know, which I haven't, or at least I was timing more for like, you know, more or less 45 minutes. Yeah, so, but in any case, yeah, I spent too much time early on simple stuff, and then I started rushing and it just snowballed basically. So I'm going to focus most on kind of, you know, going as quickly as possible to the interesting stuff, and kind of relying a little bit more on, you know, the interviewer maybe jumping in and asking questions if they are not confident that I know what I'm talking about. So that's going to be
still give them the space as you did. And for what it's worth, I thought your communication was fantastic. So don't kind of over-index and degrade that portion of the interview. I think the main takeaway should be that this was great and really close, and that you just need to make those couple changes, move faster towards what's interesting, be decisive. You're the product guy, make decisions, weigh the trade-offs, and show your conviction. Do those things. This is a slam dunk.
Awesome. Let's focus on Friday on seeing if I've made any progress on those particular things. And yeah, man, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to the next one.
Perfect. Let's do it. So yeah, I took good notes, so I'll write your written feedback and submit it now. 10 minutes or so. You'll get me.
All right. Thank you so much. Looking forward to it. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.